He came begging her for milk for his child. She breastfed the baby and gave the lonely Cheyenne rancher. The dust-choked air hung heavy over the desolate ranch, a suffocating blanket woven from endless sun and forgotten dreams. Ilara stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon, not seeing the distant mountains but the ghosts that danced in the heat haze. Every splintered plank of the farmhouse whispered of loss. Every creak of the floorboards echoed past betrayals. Her life, once vibrant and full of a burgeoning hope, had withered in this arid landscape, leaving behind a woman etched with bitterness, a soul as parched as the cracked earth beneath her feet. The sun, a merciless orb, beat down, mirroring the relentless ache in her chest. She had built walls around herself higher and thicker than any stone barrier, designed to keep out the world's cruelties, but most of all, to keep out any burgeoning flicker of emotion that might threaten to burn her again. Her hands, calloused from work she no longer cared for, trembled faintly as she clutched the window frame, the wood rough beneath her fingertips, a stark reminder of the harsh realities she had embraced. This isolated existence was her penance, a self-imposed exile from a world that had, in her mind, irrevocably wronged her. She had long ago abandoned the simple comforts, the gentle touch of a friendly face, the solace of shared laughter. Now, only the relentless wind, carrying whispers of nothingness, accompanied her silence. What did it mean, to live, when all that remained was the echo of what had been lost? What purpose did a heart serve, when it had been meticulously chipped away, piece by agonizing piece, until only a hollow shell remained? This was her life now, a stark canvas painted in shades of gray and the unrelenting beige of the desert. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments where are you watching from, and subscribe if you want more content like this one. A shadow fell across the sun-drenched porch, sudden and stark against the bright light. Ilara flinched, a visceral reaction born of years of solitude turning slowly to face the unexpected intrusion. A man stood there, his frame gaunt, his clothes caked with dust, holding a bundle wrapped in frayed cloth. His eyes, sunken and shadowed, held a desperation that pierced through her carefully constructed armor, if only for a fleeting moment. He was a Cheyenne rancher. She knew him by reputation, a quiet, solitary figure from the far reaches of the territory, often the subject of hushed, prejudiced whispers in town. He stammered, his voice raw, barely a whisper, a broken plea. "Milk, for my child. She's fading." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken tragedy. A stark, uncomfortable truth. Ilara's breath hitched. Milk. Not for him, but for a child. A child. The word resonated with a dark, familiar pain deep within her. A wound she had believed was long since scabbed over, hardened into an impenetrable scar. She stared at him, at the fragile bundle in his arms, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Her first instinct was to turn him away, to protect herself from the inevitable sorrow that any connection, however brief, might bring. Compassion, a feeling she had meticulously buried, flickered weakly within her, warring with the fierce, protective bitterness that had become her constant companion. This was not her burden, she reminded herself, not her fight, yet the image of a fading child, a life teetering on the precipice, gnawed at the edges of her resolve. The man, Silas as she now recognized him, swayed slightly, a testament to his exhaustion, his ordeal. The infant whimpered, a thin, reedy sound that tore at something deep inside Ilara, a forgotten chord struck by the universal language of distress. Was this an omen? A test? Or simply a desperate man at the end of his tether, knocking on the door of the one woman who had nothing left to give? The silence stretched, thick with unspoken pleas and internal battles, punctuated only by the distant caw of a crow and the frantic beat of Ilara's own heart. The air itself seemed to crackle with the profound weight of the moment, a crucible where pity clashed with a lifetime of pain. The infant's cry intensified, a tiny, ragged sound that cut through the oppressive silence, through the layers of Ilara's carefully constructed indifference. She saw the child's face, pale and pinched, peeking out from the folds of the blanket, a mere wisp of life. It was then, in that agonizing instant, that the walls she had so painstakingly built around her heart began to crack. a hairline fracture appearing in the edifice of her resolve. A forgotten memory, sharp and sudden, pierced through her numbness. The warmth of a small hand in hers, the innocent gaze of eyes that once looked up at her with boundless trust. A ghost, swift and agonizing of what she had lost. Her own body, for years a mere vessel for her grief, stirred with an instinctual, primal ache. She looked at Silas again, his face a mask of desperate hope and profound weariness. He was not asking for charity, not truly. He was begging for life itself, for his child, for a chance. And in that moment she saw not the Cheyenne rancher, not the object of societal prejudice, but a father, broken and vulnerable. Without a word, a decision forming not in her mind, but in the depths of her being, she reached out, her hands moving as if guided by an unseen force, taking the fragile bundle from his trembling arms. The baby was feather light, almost insubstantial, yet its warmth radiated through the thin cloth an unexpected comfort. A profound silence descended, broken only by the infant's soft, desperate suckling sounds against her breast. It was an act born not of thought, but of a deep ancient understanding, a universal language of need and succor. Her body, long dormant, responded, a milky warmth spreading, easing the baby's cries. Silas watched, tears tracking paths through the dust on his cheeks, a silent gratitude radiating from him that was more potent than any spoken word. The air in the small, lonely room shifted, softening, warmed by this unexpected communion. It was a fragile, tender moment, utterly out of place in a world that had become so harsh and unyielding, yet profoundly real. What would this unexpected act of raw human connection mean for them both? The question hung, unanswered, in the space between them. The small ranch house, usually a bastion of Alara's solitude, now held the lingering echo of Silas's presence, the quiet warmth of the baby's breath. After the child had nursed, drawing life from her, Silas had taken her back, his touch reverent, his gaze meeting Alara's with an unspoken depth that unnerved her. There were no effusive thanks, no grand declarations, just a profound, raw gratitude that settled in the quiet spaces between them. He had simply nodded, a slight inclination of his head before turning to leave, melting back into the vast, indifferent landscape from which he had emerged. But something had shifted. The air around Alara felt thinner, the oppressive weight of her isolation momentarily lifted, replaced by a strange, unsettling vulnerability. She walked through her house, touching familiar objects, but they felt different, imbued with the memory of that raw, unexpected intimacy. Her mind, usually so adept at suppressing the past, now found itself assaulted by fragmented images. The miniature boot she had kept in a dusty box, the lullabies she no longer sang, the profound silence that had swallowed her world after the loss of her own child. The grief, dormant for so long, stirred, a phantom limb aching with renewed intensity. She had fled to this desolate place not just for solitude, but for punishment, for the quiet torment of memory. Her husband, Thomas, a man of quick tempers and even quicker judgments, had blamed her, in his drunken stupors, for their daughter's illness, for her eventual demise. He had accused her of being cold, of not caring enough, words that had festered in her soul, turning her heart to stone. His accusations, coupled with her own crushing guilt, had driven her to this desolate refuge. He had left her eventually, seeking solace in a bottle and other women, leaving her to grapple with the ghosts alone. Silas, the Cheyenne rancher, represented a mirror of sorts, a reflection of a father's desperation, a parent's unwavering love. It was a painful reflection, reminding her of a love she had once known, and a failure she had never forgiven herself for. She thought of Silas's stoic face, the silent burden he carried. He was lonely, yes, but he was fighting. He hadn't given up, not like she had. The knowledge sat heavy within her, a new kind of tension, a challenge to her ingrained despair. What would become of him, of them in this unforgiving land? The ripples of that strange, private act soon began to spread through the small, tightly knit community of Hope Springs, a place where whispers traveled faster than the wind. Alara had always been an enigma, a woman who lived on the fringes, her past shrouded in sorrow and speculation. Now, that sorrow was compounded by a new scandal, a tale whispered in hushed tones over picket fences and across dry goods counters. She breastfed a Cheyenne child. The women clucked, their faces a mixture of disgust and morbid fascination. A savage's child. What was she thinking? Their words, sharp as shards of glass, cut through the quiet hum of the town, each pronouncement a judgment, a condemnation. Reverend Davies, a man whose piety was matched only by his rigid adherence to societal norms, preached subtly from the pulpit about purity and the dangers of mixing bloodlines, his gaze pointedly lingering on the empty pew where Alara never sat. The men, gathered outside the saloon, eyed Silas with renewed suspicion, their prejudices inflamed by the perceived transgression. That Cheyenne, one gruff rancher muttered, always bringing trouble. Now he's got that strange woman under his thumb. Silas, a man of quiet dignity and deep roots, was already an outsider. His tribe's land slowly encroached upon, their traditional ways eroding under the relentless tide of white settlement. His desperation, his pleas, were seen not as human vulnerability, but as a weakness to be exploited, a sign of his otherness. The town, steeped in its own biases and fears, saw only what it wanted to see: a woman who had crossed an unspoken line, and a man who, by his very existence, challenged their established order. Alara felt their collective gaze, a tangible weight on her shoulders. Even from the solitude of her ranch, she heard the snippets of gossip carried on the wind, the thinly veiled contempt, a flicker of her old defiance, a spark she thought long extinguished, ignited within her. They could judge, they could whisper, they could condemn, but they hadn't seen the child's desperate eyes, hadn't felt its tiny body trembling with hunger. They hadn't faced the raw, undeniable truth of life clinging by a thread. Their ignorance, their blind prejudice was a far greater failing than her act of simple, desperate compassion. Their whispers, instead of breaking her, hardened her resolve, cementing an unexpected bond with the lonely rancher she barely knew. Silas returned 2 days later, not with the desperation of a man begging, but with the quiet dignity of one offering. He brought a small, rough-hewn wooden bird carved with surprising detail, a delicate, almost whimsical creature that seemed entirely out of place in his weathered hand. He offered it to her, a gesture of silent thanks, his gaze direct and unblinking. "She is better," he said, his voice low, a gravelly whisper against the vast silence of the prairie. "Because of you." Alara took the bird, her fingers tracing the smooth lines of its wings. It was a simple gift, yet it held a weight of gratitude far beyond its material value. For the first time since her own tragedy, she felt a strange loosening in her chest, a faint warmth spreading through her veins. They sat on her porch, two solitary figures silhouetted against the fading light, the vast, indifferent landscape their only witness. Their dialogue was sparse, fragments of sentences hanging in the air, weighted with unspoken histories. Silas spoke of the drought, of his struggles to keep his small herd alive, of the sickness that had claimed his wife, leaving him alone with their infant daughter. His words were raw, unvarnished, painting a picture of relentless hardship, yet laced with an enduring resilience. He spoke of his Cheyenne heritage, not with anger, but with a quiet pride, explaining how his people had always respected the land, lived in harmony with its rhythms, lessons now forgotten by many. Alara, in turn, found herself speaking of her past, not in full detail, but in vague allusions to loss and betrayal, to the crushing weight of guilt. She spoke of Thomas, her husband, and the bitterness that had consumed him, and her, after their daughter's death. "He said I didn't care enough," she murmured, her voice barely audible, "that I was cold." Silas listened, his dark eyes understanding, devoid of judgment. He merely nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her pain, offering no platitudes, no facile solutions. This quiet communion, this shared vulnerability was a balm to her wounded spirit. She found herself observing him, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a Cheyenne rancher as the town labeled him, but as a man of profound strength and quiet suffering. His loneliness mirrored her own, yet he bore it with a stoic grace she found herself envying. A fragile thread, woven from shared sorrow and unexpected kindness, began to stretch between them, tenuous but undeniably present, binding them in the vast, empty expanse of their separate worlds. The wooden bird sat on her mantelpiece, a small, tangible reminder of Silas and his child, a silent testament to the fragile connection that had begun to form between them. Ilara found herself looking at it often, her fingers tracing its smooth contours, a silent communion with the man who had brought it. The gift she had given him beyond the life-sustaining milk was not a material thing, nor was it easily definable. It was the spark of recognition, the offering of an unexpected human kindness in a world that had become brutally indifferent. It was the moment she had chosen vulnerability over hardened self-preservation, compassion over bitter resentment, and in that choice she had inadvertently given herself a gift too, a fleeting glimpse of a different path, a crack in the wall of her own despair. The open loop of her solitary existence, which had seemed so complete and final, now felt subtly disturbed, its edges frayed by the possibilities introduced by Silas. What she had given him was, perhaps, a simple affirmation of his worth, a recognition of his struggle that transcended the racial and societal barriers that sought to define him. It was a reminder that even in the bleakest of times, a hand might be extended, a kindness offered, without expectation or judgment. She remembered the look in his eyes when he took his child back, a profound, almost sacred relief. It was a look that had, in its own way, begun to dislodge some of the tightly packed sediment of her grief. She had given him a reprieve, a chance for his child, and in doing so she had found a tiny, almost imperceptible reprieve for herself. The gift was also a secret understanding, a quiet alliance forged in the crucible of desperation and defiance against a judgmental world. It was a silent rebellion against the town's prejudice, against the ingrained societal biases that sought to diminish them both. This was not about romance, or even friendship in the conventional sense. It was deeper, more fundamental. It was about recognizing shared humanity, a connection forged not through shared words, but through shared pain and unexpected solace. What would such a profound, unspoken offering ultimately lead to? The question lingered, an unspoken promise, a nascent hope emerging from the ashes of her past. The fragile peace that had settled over Ilara's ranch was shattered by the harsh realities of the world beyond its fence posts. News reached her, carried by a lone rider who paused only long enough to relay the grim tidings. Silas's land was under threat. A prominent land speculator from the city, a man named Sterling, notorious for his ruthless tactics and blatant disregard for native claims, was moving to seize Silas's ranch. He had been quietly buying up surrounding properties, maneuvering to gain control of the vital water sources that ran through Silas's ancestral lands. Silas, as a Cheyenne man, had always faced an uphill battle in securing his rights in the eyes of the white man's law, and Sterling was exploiting every loophole, every prejudice. The town, rather than rallying to Silas's aid, seemed to turn a blind eye, their ingrained biases making them complicit, if not openly supportive, of Sterling's machinations. Some even whispered that Silas, with his strange ways and mixed-race child, deserved to lose his land. The situation escalated rapidly. Sterling's men began harassing Silas, driving off his cattle, poisoning his wells, making his life a living hell. The stakes were impossibly high. If Silas lost his land, he lost everything, including the very future of his child. Ilara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Her initial act of compassion had drawn her into a conflict far larger than she could have imagined. She saw Silas in town one day, his face drawn, his eyes weary but defiant. He carried his daughter, now looking stronger, healthier, a testament to her care. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and in his she saw not only desperation, but a quiet plea, a silent acknowledgement of their shared plight. The town's scorn felt sharper now, directed at her for her association with him. She was no longer merely strange. She was an accomplice, an outsider who had dared to align herself with the other. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken threats and simmering resentment. Could she stand by and watch Silas lose everything, knowing she had helped save his child? Could she let the prejudice of others extinguish the fragile flicker of hope she had unknowingly ignited? The question burned within her, a crucible refining her dormant will, forcing her to confront not only the external threat to Silas, but the internal battle with her own long-held apathy. Her past had taught her to retreat, to surrender, but the soft weight of that baby in her arms, the quiet gratitude in Silas's eyes, demanded a different path. The confrontation came, not with a bang, but with the insidious creep of encroaching darkness. Sterling's foreman, a sneering brute named Wallace, rode onto Silas's land one twilight, accompanied by a handful of armed men. They weren't there to negotiate. They were there to intimidate, to make their claim undeniable. Silas stood alone, his rifle clutched tightly, his daughter clutched even tighter behind him, her small face buried in his leg. The air crackled with a dangerous silence, broken only by Wallace's taunts, his demands for Silas to abandon his land, to go back to where you belong. This was the pivotal emotional climax, not a dramatic shootout, but a tense standoff, a quiet act of immense bravery against overwhelming odds. Ilara, having ridden out to check on Silas after hearing the rumors, arrived just as the situation teetered on the brink of violence. She reined in her horse, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Fear, cold and visceral, momentarily threatened to paralyze her. But then she saw Silas's unwavering stance, the desperate plea in his daughter's wide, terrified eyes, and something shifted within her. The bitterness that had long encased her heart began to chip away, exposing a core of fierce, almost forgotten protectiveness. She dismounted, slowly, deliberately, her gaze locked on Wallace. "This land belongs to him," she stated. Her voice, though trembling slightly, carried an unexpected strength echoing across the darkening prairie. "He has papers, lawfully filed." Wallace laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "And who are you, woman?" "His squaw." The slur ignited a fire in Ilara, hotter than any anger she had felt in years. Her own past, the accusations of being cold, uncaring, now fueled a burning defiance. "I am a neighbor," she retorted, her voice gaining volume. "And I have seen the way you operate. You're a thief and a coward, and I will bear witness to every vile act you commit." Her words, though not physically threatening, carried the weight of moral condemnation, a stark challenge to his assumed authority. Silas glanced at her, a flicker of surprise and profound gratitude in his eyes. Her intervention was not strategic, but raw, born of a powerful, undeniable instinct. This was not the woman who had hidden from the world, but one reclaiming a part of herself she thought long dead. She was no longer just the grieving widow. She was a witness, a protector, her presence a silent yet powerful testament to truth and justice in a world steeped in lies and prejudice. The stakes were laid bare, not just land, but human decency, human connection, against the relentless tide of greed and hatred. Wallace, momentarily taken aback by Ilara's unexpected interjection, merely scoffed, though a flicker of unease crossed his eyes. He hadn't anticipated a witness, especially not her. He gave a final crude warning, threatening Silas with more than just land seizure if he didn't comply. Before turning his horse and riding off into the gathering gloom with his men, their retreat a grudging concession to the unexpected presence. The immediate danger receded, leaving behind a heavy silence thick with lingering tension. Ilara stood there, her body still trembling, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Silas lowered his rifle, his shoulders slumping with relief, yet his gaze remained fixed on her, filled with a mixture of wonder and profound understanding. "Why?" he asked, his voice raw. Not, "Thank you," but why? He saw the risk she had taken, the direct challenge she had issued to forces far more powerful than either of them. Ilara met his gaze, the vastness of the prairie mirroring the depth of the moment. She couldn't articulate the complex tangle of emotions that had propelled her forward, the lingering echoes of her own past helplessness, the stirring of her long-buried sense of justice, the profound connection she felt to this man and his child. Some things are simply wrong," she finally managed, her voice hoarse. It was a simple truth, yet it carried the weight of all she had endured, all she had witnessed. She looked at Silas's daughter, now peeking out from behind his leg, her small hand clutching his trousers. In that child's innocent eyes, Ilara saw not just hope, but a reflection of her own lost dreams, a chance to perhaps redeem a piece of her shattered past. The act of defending Silas, of standing up for what was right, had released a torrent of long-suppressed emotions within her. She was exhausted, yet invigorated. The bitterness, though not entirely gone, had lessened its grip. The walls around her heart had not crumbled, but they had certainly shifted, allowing in a sliver of light, a breath of clean air. This was the aftermath of the climax, a quiet, reflective space where the true weight of their shared struggle and her awakening began to settle. The world would continue to judge, to whisper, but for the first time in years, Ilara felt a quiet strength, a sense of purpose beyond her own personal grief. She had found a reason to fight, not for herself, but for something larger, something inherently good. The gift she had given Silas was evolving, transforming into a shared burden, a quiet promise of solidarity in an increasingly hostile world. The path ahead was still uncertain, fraught with peril, but she was no longer alone in her fight. The fight against Sterling and his ruthless machinations was far from over, but Ilara's intervention had given Silas something invaluable. Not just time, but a tangible ally, an unexpected voice raised in his defense. The simple act of her standing beside him, a white woman challenging the ingrained prejudices of the community, sent a ripple of disquiet through the town. Some of the more decent citizens, previously silent in their disapproval of Sterling's methods, began to question their complicity. The tide, imperceptibly at first, began to turn. Ilara herself, once a pariah, found herself regarded with a new, if grudging, respect by a few, and intense disdain by others. She no longer cared. Her focus had shifted from her own internal torment to the tangible injustice unfolding around her. She helped Silas gather evidence of Sterling's unlawful actions, riding into town with him, her presence a silent challenge to the gossiping tongues. Her farmhouse, once a tomb of her despair, became a place of quiet strategy, a sanctuary for Silas and his daughter, where the child's soft laughter occasionally echoed, a sound that brought an unfamiliar lightness to Ilara's heart. The gift she had given Silas had blossomed into a shared future, an intertwining of two disparate lives brought together by desperation and transformed by compassion. The hope was not a naive, saccharine kind, but a hard-won, grounded hope, forged in the crucible of adversity. It was the hope that justice, however slow, might prevail. It was the hope that connection, however unlikely, could heal even the deepest wounds. Her own grief, while never entirely absent, no longer defined her. It had become a part of her story, a scar that reminded her of resilience, not just loss. She looked at the wooden bird on her mantelpiece, no longer just a symbol of initial gratitude, but of a shared journey, a quiet promise of a future where different worlds could coexist, if only through the acts of two solitary individuals. The lonely Cheyenne rancher found not just sustenance for his child, but an ally, a confidant, and a quiet champion. And Ilara, the woman consumed by loss, found in the act of giving a profound reclamation of her own humanity, a purpose beyond sorrow, a glimmer of light in the vast, unforgiving landscape. The story of their unlikely bond would remain, a testament to the enduring power of compassion in a world too often shadowed by prejudice and pain.